every time you and SparkToro kind of like comes back on my radar, which is increasing, I feel like I'm seeing more and more stuff. I always think, wow, like I feel like we live in different parts of the same kind of vision of the future, to a degree. Totally paraphrasing. Obviously, you're very focused with SparkToro on the audience. For us, it's about kind of activation of the individual, as a marketer. But as a business, we primarily work with B2B companies. I think I'm always kind of interested in exploring, what the avenues may be for us to get to a place where we kind of turn more B2C heads around. And I think that's probably related to the topic of kind of demand creation. But for the most part, our client base is B2B. Mm-hmm. And a lot of larger companies, our smallest clients are kind of in the hundreds of employees. And then we have 2 clients with over 1 million employees. So pretty significant organizations. But so anyways, that's kind of the audience, I guess, in many respects. Is our senior most kind of sponsor at most of these organizations is typically a CMO or a very senior level marketer. And one of the interesting things that we see is that marketing is we're used by a lot of recruiting teams, we're used by sales teams, and a variety of other functions. And the overlap between those and marketing is only increasing, and marketing's kind of reliance on and involvement in, really enabling these organizations to almost serve as proxy marketers. That's kind of the current environment and theme and what people are thinking about. Certainly my head got turned around on your post, which kind of had nothing to do with what John Oliver highlighted from it, but cool nonetheless. Just macro changes with the platforms. And, I think one thing that I've noticed with this audience is there seems to be this general view that, like, oh my God, things are changing big time. But and we have some view of, kind of like the idea of brand marketing platforms and ads and the tried and true. It's working less and less. I don't think anyone thinks that it's going to turn around the other direction. And but there's not clarity on, what we're moving towards, right? I think there's little kind of glimpses and pieces, and I feel like, that's again kind of why I see SparkToro as particularly kind of relevant kind of in the world in which we're operating. But I don't know, it just seems like a very interesting point in time, from kind of a marketing perspective. And again, at least from our end, working with these generally larger organizations. But maybe just to start things off, how, in your view, has marketing changed? And you started Moz, and that whole era of content marketing and SEO, and which is not to say that it's dead, but it's certainly changed versus today. Like, how would you describe the last 10 to 15 years in terms of how marketing has evolved on the web?
Yeah, so I think the biggest change is definitely driven by the mass adoption of a few platforms over kind of the diversity of the open web. So, you can basically name about 10 companies and properties that now have, 70 to 80% of time spent online is through these few properties, and everyone else is essentially playing on these big monopoly platforms, as opposed to kind of the open web being a place that is surfed around, and there's huge long tail, lots of distribution of activity across thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of websites and properties. And that concentration has also come with a shift in incentives for those companies. So go back 15 years, Google, Facebook, which barely existed, didn't really exist 15 years ago. Twitter, which barely existed, LinkedIn, Reddit, all of these platforms, YouTube, their growth came from the growth of the internet. So essentially, as long as they were popular, useful, usable, interesting, had some decent curation of whatever, and got creators to build stuff on them, they grew massively, exponentially, because internet access was growing so ludicrously fast from, 1995 to 2012, 15 even. In a lot of parts of the world, it's still growing, but now that growth has slowed. Basically, almost all of the rich world is online, right? So wealthy countries, middle income countries, almost everyone is online that you're going to get.
Yeah.
And so you can't get that growth anymore from just raw user growth. And so Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Reddit, TikTok, everyone has to instead think, how do we take users that we already have or that other people have and keep them on our platform and monetize them further and extract more revenue per user? And this is why you get, all of the trends that we're seeing, right? Zero-click searches on Google, native content dominating the online platforms, Facebook and Google essentially backing privacy laws, which essentially just help them consolidate their power in the advertising space and make sure nobody else can ever compete with them. And I think, that in ways it's very frustrating and it sucks. The good thing for marketers is now you can focus your time on just a few places and, get 90% of the value. So there is that. I think you can also get deep expertise in one sector and be a very effective marketer. That's the big shift.
I mean, I think you articulated that really well. So we've had an opportunity to kind of see this from the inside, and I think there's probably parallels with Google, but particularly looking at the major social platforms, right? You talked about the fact that when user growth is in the double digits, it's very easy to put up increased revenue numbers. But when that starts to taper off, now you're looking at ARPU on a per user basis without the kind of top line growth that that drove these companies to kind of their heyday. Facebook, of course, being like a great example. I think one of the interesting things, though, and Facebook is going through these machinations now, and they started X years ago, but there's I think a less nefarious kind of underlying existential crisis that they face, which is as we both know, these are companies that, again, have conditioned kind of the public market on putting up these giant revenue, gains quarter over quarter, and they're trying to keep pace with that. But underlying it all, the thing that is most important to them is user acquisition, retention, and engagement. And you and I and anyone else who's ever participated, and feel free to agree or disagree with this, but this is my view, is that and again, having kind of seen it from the inside, at least at Reddit, is that more than revenue, they care about that, because when the markets start to see user numbers tapering off, engagement and retention tapering off, it's seen as the beginning of the end, right? It's one thing to say, well, we're maybe not monetizing them quite as effectively, but at least we've got growth. And fundamentally, the more ads and the more sponsorships and things that users are seeing, the less it's a negative correlation, right? Mm-hmm. Like the less you want to be there, the less you want to spend time there. And I think it was 2018 when Zuckerberg came out and said, making a bunch of changes to timeline to focus on real people connections and kind of getting back to our roots. And, oh, by the way, sponsors and advertisers, it's basically just going to cost you more, to try and get what you need. But I don't know, like to your one of your beginning points, I don't know if you would agree with this, but like Google and many of these other platforms, I would kind of think of them as part of the open web in the early days, and the walls have slowly been built. I mean, do you think, are they forever going to be walled garden? Are we heading perhaps towards a place of more openness in kind of a 5+ year time frame?
Let's see, if this Online Innovation Act that's before Congress passes, maybe, yeah, right. So there's a bill being considered. It has enough votes, but it appears that Chuck Schumer is getting paid a lot of money by Google and Apple and Amazon to not bring it to the floor for a vote, and so maybe it'll never come to a vote, and these platforms will sort of win through legalized bribery. But if it does come to the floor for a vote, if there was enough pressure on Schumer to bring it to the floor, you probably see that bill passed. It's one of the few pieces of bipartisan legislation that's up for grabs, and that would prevent Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, all these people from preferencing their own properties in their platforms. So essentially, you search the Apple store, Apple can't put the Apple weather app above every other app in a different format. They have to have some, reasonable ranking system, and the Apple weather app participates in that the same way as everyone else. Google can't just put their maps and weather and travel widgets, Google Flights, Google Hotels, Google Mortgage Calculator, right? They can't just put their stuff always at the top. They can't preference to YouTube over every other video site. That significantly changes the game. We could see a much more open web and more participation in the open web from all of these big platforms if legislation like that passes. What are the odds that I have no idea. I don't know how effective it is to buy off a senator's vote. Like, it seems like it's kind of cheap. Like they're only donating like maybe collectively a few $1 million. It seems like, I don't know, if I were DuckDuckGo, I'd spend like 10 million to try and get it overturned, but I don't know how it works, right? Like it's clearly a complex process. But in the absence of government intervention, I can't see it happening because the incentives aren't there, right? The platforms, to your point around how the public markets behave, right? They want to see user growth and they want to see revenue growth. I suspect actually weirdly right now, because of market conditions, they care a little bit more about revenue and profitability growth than they do about user growth, but it could swing back in a, more fiscally liberal environment, which we might encounter again if this recession proves to be short-lived. So yeah, man, I mean, this is all super big picture stuff. I'm sure, marketers and stuff, people who listen, business owners who listen are like, why do I care about these macroeconomic and legal and political issues? And it's because they directly impact all of us, right? The fact that, in 1999, the FCC was willing to take very significant antitrust action against Microsoft is what allowed Google, Facebook, YouTube, Reddit, you name it, everything else on the web to exist. All of those other big platforms. It meant that we didn't have Internet Explorer as the only browser available to us. It meant that Microsoft couldn't choose what all of our homepages were. Like, all these things changed as a result. And the fact that essentially since, the George W. Bush era, like, we haven't seen that kind of antitrust enforcement, you get the situation that we're in today, which some people like and some people hate.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the juxtaposition of, what power do we really have to affect any of this? But in fact, it does very much affect our reality, right? As a marketer, things getting more expensive, getting less effective. And I mean, we've got enough years left in us. I think we'll see whatever's next, which is going to, I think, be interesting. We saw the beginning of the web. We've seen it build up to this kind of monolithic state with these various properties. And
I mean, Cameron, let's talk about the other big thing that's going to affect the open web, right? And just basically the interoperability of the internet is, if we see the planet move in more of a Cold War direction, right? Where it's kind of Russia and China and then like the West and the rest of the world, and a lot of, conflict being fought over Africa, Mideast countries and their support and that kind of thing, you almost certainly will see things like TikTok getting banned in Western countries, right? And like that completely disappearing off the map. The FCC recommended, right? They sent a letter to Google and Apple this week saying, take TikTok down, like take it out of your stores. They can't enforce it. It was a request, not an enforcement, but that is the first step to enforcement. That massively changed. TikTok is dominating young people's time online right now. And that could create a huge hole that either one of the existing incumbents like Facebook could fill, or maybe, I don't know, 10 new startups, right, that are all VC backed and just waiting to launch their TikTok replacement.
Well, there's probably none of those right now. It just is a present day example of that. We have a number of clients who are extremely high profile organizations with global operations, who in some cases we work with on kind of employer branding, their hiring efforts in China. And of course, LinkedIn is no longer, in China, and their navigation of that. And it's very interesting to see. It's because it's a physical segregation, right? Like, there are things that you just simply can't have access to.
I think we're used to this, those of us who've grown up the last 40 years, especially, right? If you're kind of our age, like I guess I barely remember in childhood a time when it was like, oh, the United States versus the USSR, right? And kind of what the 80s were like, but we've basically lived in an economically free and open planet. And the idea of going back is just so strange, but it very well could be the direction that things take.
So presumably all of these things in your mind that you're thinking about, in some way, shape, or form contributed towards you starting SparkToro. So I would love to hear, why did you start SparkToro, and what were your first principles? What were the things that contributed towards your decision to, as you were very familiar with, taking kind of the big leap to commit yourself to building a new company?
So being totally honest, a big part of my drive to start SparkToro was wanting to build a successful product in the marketing universe and kind of prove to myself that I could do it again, and prove to some people who from Moz's board of directors who doubted my abilities to do that at Moz. I think, that driver, even though it's not necessarily the most emotionally healthy thing to use to motivate you. Don't say revenge. Don't say revenge. Revenge. The outcome of that is a positive one, right? So I knew I wanted to build something in the marketing universe using the kind of network and knowledge that I built up over the previous 17 years. And I also knew that I wanted something that was very far outside of the SEO space. I had a non-compete with Moz that was very strict and continues to this day. Actually, I'm still not out from under it. And that meant not operating in a world around, search data and the search world. And then I had this passion for finding sources of influence, right? Things that influence people and their behavior, their awareness of a product or a service, their decision to buy it, that were not just Google and Facebook, right? And Amazon, right? Like the duopoly / triopoly, if we're talking e-commerce, is overwhelmingly powerful. They get something in excess of 85% of all online ad spend, and I don't think that's right. Like I think a tremendous number of the conversions, the sales that you appear to get in your analytics through Google, Facebook, Amazon would have happened anyway. you would have received those conversions even if you hadn't spent those dollars with those marketing platforms.
Yeah.
It's just that they're very good at making sure that when you do spend money with them, they take credit, right? They analytically take credit in your data for those transactions. And I think that sucks. I think marketers should be able to break free from this world. And so SparkToro is a response to that, right? It's essentially saying, where can I go spend marketing time and energy, organic or paid, that will reach the audience that I want to reach and produce outstanding results, even if it's not perfectly measurable.
So I totally agree with what you're saying. And it's an amazing pitch that's been established, right? There's you and there's your prospective buyer, and this distance and activities and things that occur, between kind of them not knowing about you and, a purchase event or whatever. And I saw something really interesting. It was a guy, I'm forgetting who he was involved with, but a pretty, high profile startup guy on Twitter. And in particular, he had been involved with DTC, like direct to consumer stuff. Yeah. And, everyone's like sober now, apparently, for the first time in like the last 10 years. And his thread was like, look, I've launched, X number of DTC brands. He'd been on the investor side as well. And he basically said, I don't think it works. Like, the economics are horrible. He went into a kind of a deeper thread around the collective revenues and businesses of Spotify are far less than the overall value of Spotify as a company. I'm sorry, not Spotify, Shopify. Shopify, right? Just as kind of the example of like the headiness and kind of misunderstanding of this kind of stuff. But I think if DTC doesn't work from a like put an ad out there to drive a economically positive transaction, then it's just, I don't know, in my view, kind of a canary in the coal mine as it relates to ads and kind of other applications. I want to ask you two questions though about something you just said. So, what can ads do? What part do they play, if any? Like, in your view, do you put any money towards ads? Like, where do you think it's effective versus like where are people going like way off the path?
So I think that ads can be effective. You don't know whether they are until you turn them off. So basically, the problem that we have is a ton of CMOs and VPs of marketing and even CEOs of companies of all kinds have for the last quarter century been told growth at all costs. Growth is the most important thing. Profitability, meh, don't worry, money's cheap. There's always more where that came from, as long as you're showing up into the right numbers around your growth. And that's growth of sales, growth of customers, growth of, in the case of social networks, users. What that has created is an incentive system where no CMO, no VP of marketing, no director of marketing, no marketing specialist, no one down the chain has an incentive to do incrementality testing, which is the only way to find out if advertising is effective. So let's say you have a very large, ad campaign and you're running it across tons of sites, and all it's really contributing incrementally is, 5% or 4% growth. The other 80% of view through conversions or advertising attributable results would have happened anyway. Like, you would have gotten those sales regardless of whether that person saw that ad, whatever, at the top of Google for your brand name, or in a YouTube pre-roll ad, or, as they're scrolling Instagram or whatever it is. But the CMO's like, no, don't turn off I don't care if we're losing $1 million a month so on the ads. Turn off. Yeah. I want that 5% growth, right? I'm not willing to test it. It because we would have to see, we can't just test it for a month or a week. We need 6 months. We need to see whether, the ads are creating a brand awareness that leads to discovery, that leads to, eventual sales. So we would have to turn them off for 6 months, 9 months, in some cases of long lead cycles in B2B world, a year. I'm not willing to take that risk. And so
Right.
I'll spend the money with the platforms, regardless of whether it's actually producing results. In some cases, it's probably negative, lots of cases. And this is why
Oh,
every few years, maybe even every 6 months, you see a big story like Chase turned off, whatever, $40 million of advertising. Uber turned off $100 million of advertising and saw their results get better. Who was it? Procter and Gamble, right, had a similar story like that. eBay had a story from a few years ago where they turned off all their Google ad spend and results stayed the same. Airbnb was the latest one, I think, in the earnings report, right? Brian Chesky talking about how Airbnb turned off all their advertising and they saw a loss of 5% or something, right? So there you go. Now you know what your incrementality is, but most businesses aren't willing to take that leap. And so you get the world that we're in.
Okay, so another question. What is an influencer to you? And maybe we'll just start with that.
Yeah. I mean, Cameron, I have a definition I really like, but it's 10 years old, right? So if you and I were having this conversation and it were 2012, we'd be like, oh yeah, influencer, which to us would mean a source of influence. Someone who runs a podcast, could be a person with an email newsletter, might be a journalist, could be an industry publication, might be an event or conference, could be a million things. But today, I recognize that language evolves, and influencer means half-naked person on a beach who takes photos of themselves with your product, and you pay them $500, and that is influencer. So whatever, I give up. I'm not going to try and change language. Like I don't have that kind of power. I will just say, I think classic influencers, right? The half-naked dude with his 12-pack abs or whatever he's got, posing with your product. I don't think that person and that segment should be as deeply invested in as it is and as focused on as it is. I think it has mediocre or less than stellar impact on buying decisions. But I do think sources of influence, if you find a person, a publication, a podcast, an event, a newsletter, a website, whatever it is that your audience pays attention to, and you can prove that with data. Like, hey, I looked at our audience. Here's our email list. I took our email list and I ran it through, Clearbit and Full Contact and whatever, and I connected it up to all their social profiles. And then I, built a crawler to go crawl every single one of our, email lists, Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and Reddit and YouTube accounts and Instagram accounts. And I looked at everything that they follow and liked. And okay, we can see that 16.2% engaged with this podcast. That is the podcast we should be on. I think that is incredibly valuable, ludicrously valuable. I don't think there is a better marketing investment than you can make than to say, this is the audience I want to reach. This is the publication person, source of influence they pay attention to. How do I get them to amplify my message to these people? Hopefully editorially, but it could be through advertising too. And this is exactly what SparkToro does, right? So SparkToro basically says, oh, you want to understand this audience over here? Like, we will tell you what they read, watch, listen to, follow, engage with, et cetera. So, I had this thesis long before I started the company that this was the kind of the best, absolute best way you could possibly do marketing. And then built a product to hopefully make that process easier, because I don't know if you've ever tried to build a crawler to crawl all of your customers' public social profiles, but it's a goddamn pain in the butt.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, no, we actually have not as our current company, but as long ago, kind of a precursor to it. But yeah, I mean, I would say I'm not willing to give up the ghost as it relates to influencer. I fully subscribe to your original definition, and kind of in our world, I mean, I don't. Maybe it's age or whatever, but I'm not really on Instagram. I see things from TikTok that are kind of shared with me. I'm interested in exploring that personally. in particular, as a part of, my role with our business, is I'm sure you're looking at various networks and channels and how could this be effective. But, it's our view is that, everyone has some level of influence, right? I mean, we're all professionals, and all of us have some, we're doing something to pay our bills and support our family and pursue aspirations and so forth. And in particular, in our slice of the world, although I would say, again, this extends to everyone, in the B2B world, there are people who you've never heard of, who are critical to decisions worth millions and tens of millions of dollars, perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases. And, the connection, the relationship, facilitating that, fostering it, all of that is worth a tremendous amount. It's worth a tremendous amount to them. It's worth a tremendous amount to the organization. So I don't necessarily want to try to change anyone's mind as to influencer, but I think, the only thing that has perhaps been somewhat of a disservice is turning off certain folks to actually realizing that they have so much value in their network, or that they could build their network to a place where, it has a lot of value relevant to them, right? Perhaps as a recruiter or a salesperson, not as, someone being body forward on, Instagram. But anyways, so all this being said, and, understanding that SparkToro and your focus is really helping people kind of identify the audience, which I think is an interesting kind of that silly example I was using earlier about, like, you as the product person and your customer out here, and there's all this stuff that people are trying to get you to spend money on between here and there, right? Ads being a huge one, right? Like, just get the ads out there. Let's spend, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, and it's going to, people are going to see it and so forth. And at some level, you're kind of doing that because you don't know who is at the other end, right? It's kind of like exposure, right?
I mean, it's black box, right? Like, and the ad networks have taken away a ton of the information that they used to give you about the audiences that they reached. And, part of that is intentional. Part of it's a response to like Cambridge Analytica, but part of it is intentional. Just, hey, how do we keep all this data for ourselves and make people, make advertisers reliant on us for the information about their audiences rather than putting the tools in their hands?
So maybe talk through, some kind of customer examples of SparkToro. They figure out who their audience is, where they're living, what they're consuming, who they're following. What do they do from there? Like, even abstracted from SparkToro as a product, like if you know where your people are, how do you effectively market today, given everything that we've discussed in terms of changing landscape, costs, platform restrictions, et cetera?
I mean, at that point, it very much becomes a list of tactics that is almost infinite in length, and a creativity problem-solving issue. So, essentially,
marketing, is that what you're saying?
Sorry.
So marketing, in short.
Yeah, marketing. I mean, so it's essentially kind of the hard work of, how do I get publication person, source of influence X to amplify the message that I want to their audience. So once I know that my audience pays attention to these 42 podcasts, these 19 YouTube channels, these 37 email newsletters, these 50 people on Twitter, this group of folks on Instagram, whatever it is, then I decide, okay, I can see that YouTube, let's say, is followed by a very high percent of the audience, and we're good at YouTube advertising. We are good at pre-roll videos. Our videos tend to attract not just view-through conversions, but actual clicks. You know what? YouTube is where we're going to start. So we're going to put a bunch of eggs in that basket. We're going to take the targeting information of these are the channels that, reach our audience the most. And we're going to pick 3 where we pitch them editorially. We reach out over email and are like, hey, I'm so-and-so from this company, our CEO and founder, or our head of innovation, or our product research lab would love to work with you on something, right? So like, Pudding.cool does a bunch of, data analysis and research. They reached out to the Vox team, and the Vox media team basically worked with them to produce this long form video basically about how what happens to users who go viral on TikTok, and like how often does it happen and who does it and what's the result. Phenomenal collaboration effort, produced a really fascinating video. I urge folks to watch it if you're at all interested in how TikTok operates, and especially what happens to people after they go viral on there. But this is like it's an outreach connection thing, right? It's not, Vox didn't, I don't think, pay Pudding.cool. Pudding.cool didn't pay Vox. It's a collaboration, just like this podcast, right? I didn't pay you. I assume you're receiving no money from anyone, right, to have me on the show. And likewise, I'm not getting anything for doing this, right? It's how do we find something that provides value to one another and hopefully to an audience, and then, get that message out there. And this process is something that a lot of marketers, especially those who've always relied on advertising, they just don't get, right? They're just like not willing to do the work or don't know how to do the work.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously there's parallels with kind of the early days of content marketing and SEO and link building. And I mean, this is all the same stuff, right? But, and the creativity is the fun part, right? Like
I love it.
You're more of a marketer than I will ever be. But, at the same time, what little I'm engaged with, I'm like, well, this is fun, right? Like signing a check to spend tens of thousands of dollars on ads and then having some boring, PowerPoint from your agents. None of it's the magic of connection. What, few other questions. There's everything gets kind of branded at one point in time. There was a guy, Dave Gerhardt, who I believe was associated with Drift. I think he was a VP marketing over there, and he had an idea which was not new at all, called founder brand, right? Which is basically the idea that the founder should be, or perhaps the CEO, depending on the business, should really be out there. And especially as it relates to something new, SparkToro, everyone social, whatever, right? Like it's probably not only our duty, but it's a huge opportunity because, the founder in many respects is kind of synonymous, and it's also the embodiment. It's synonymous with, kind of the business and you're the reason why SparkToro exists. So, that a lot of the origin story and all of that's kind of contained, but like you were doing this stuff. I mean, in my recollection, I know that, there were others kind of early web, but with Moz, you were out there front and center with your whiteboard videos, and I'm sure doing other things even before that. What have you learned about being, out there as, really the most visible person for not only for Moz, but for SparkToro? Just like, I mean, clearly you're still doing it. So some things, you must have seen success along the way.
So I would somewhat disagree with David's assertion that every founder has an obligation or every CEO does. I actually think you should do it if you're good at it and it gives you energy and brings you sort of fulfillment in your job. And I think you should outsource it either to somebody that, to people that you hire, your marketing team, or to an outsourced agency. If you're not, and you don't care about it and you're not excited about it. I have never in my life seen a CEO, founder, whatever, who's like, God, I'm terrible at marketing. I hate being out there in front of people, but I'm really good at it. Nope. Didn't happen. Right.
Well, it has to be authentic. Is that kind of
it has to be authentic, right? And there are plenty of, in fact, I would say the overwhelming majority, I bet it's 80%, if not 90% plus of founders and CEOs are not great spokespeople, evangelists, brand front and center, founder brands, whatever, as he calls it.
Yes.
I don't think they are. And so, I wouldn't encourage everyone to do it. I think this is true for every single kind of marketing. If you're like, God, I hate giving Google my money and doing ad targeting and like picking, channels to display on and then going back in every week and looking at my data and trying to fix that up. You know what I'm really good at? I'm really good at posting, visuals on Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn that people love. Well, damn it, do that. Like, do the thing that you love and are good at. Build your competitive advantage through something that gives you energy, that where when you put energy into it, when you get better at it, when you build that flywheel effect of scaling with decreasing friction, that's where you should invest. Don't go do something that you're like, well, I guess I got to go do this because that's what marketing is. Nah, man, that ain't it. You can do you.
For you, would you consider yourself more of a marketer? I know the first time we met, we talked about what you'd done at Moz and how much that had really kind of propelled that business. But I mean, I look at from afar, what you're involved with, and others where there is a founder leader who's very prominent from a marketing perspective, and I mean, the impact on those businesses has been, significant. And in some respects, I think it's even a question of like, would the thing even exist, in some successful form had that person not, kind of taken that lead?
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of joy from creating things that help other people and then hearing that they help them. I used to say that I had like a giant hole in my chest, right? And this hole could only be filled by praise from people who had gotten value from my content on the internet. And and unfortunately, like every week, it's sort of drained, completely drained. So I would have to produce something new all the time. As I've gotten older and a little more mature, I would say the hole has largely filled itself in, but it's still there. Maybe it's a smaller hole in my chest now. But yeah, absolutely. I have this almost guilt, Cameron. Like I feel, if it's been a week or two since I've produced something that sort of lots of people found valuable on the internet in the whatever worlds of tech and marketing, I feel like I got to get back out there. I got to do it again. I'm letting people down. I'm letting myself down. I'm so lazy. Like I got to get to work. It's that kind of thing. It's a powerful driver.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. And I think, I imagine that's a consistent impression of the thoughts of those who've, followed you and consumed your content over the years. I mean, it's, I think, you've always been a bit of a alternative voice, alternative perspective, again, to kind of paraphrase it, but I that's always needed, especially when 99% of everything is, kind of amplification of stuff that already exists. You, a while ago, you wrote a blog post about demand creation, and this is something that other groups have I've heard it termed more recently as demand generation, but I think you paraphrased it as inciting hunger versus serving existing appetites. I talk about that for a minute. I mean, is that an idea that's still relevant to you and SparkToro, and kind of how you think about not only your own marketing, but enabling others to be effective marketers?
Yeah, so I think this is a challenge that really comes out of like a search world. So lots of people who are in search marketing, for better or for worse, that world is entirely about serving existing demand. You are not, your goal and your work does not get more people searching for, hey, I want a alternative to Tesla, an electric vehicle. Like I want something different. All you do is try and rank your content for the existing searches in a market. You're not trying to create demand or get people to think differently about a problem or have them become aware of a problem or a product or a solution that they were never aware of before. Your entire goal is just, there's existing demand. I can see it in the search keywords that go in Google or YouTube or whatever other platform you might be optimizing for. Boom. How do I get in those results? There's a ton of existing demand. There's no doubt about it, right? There's billions of searches every day. Almost every one of them is, I want this thing and I want it right now. Many hundreds of millions of those are probably for products and services that you could answer. And my position is just on this, that if you are a marketer who's locked into that mindset, you probably should broaden your horizons, right? I don't think anyone at the C level or board level or, even VP or director level should be thinking the only way to do any marketing is to serve existing demand. How do we rank for things in Google? How do we get that traffic?
Yeah.
You should absolutely be thinking, you can assign someone to do that work or an agency to do that work, sure. But you better be thinking about, how do we create more demand? How do we make this problem more visible to people who experience it? How do we make our solution known to them? How do we make sure to position ourselves in a place so that when they think about this problem, they think about us as the solution? That kind of demand generation, appetite building. That is crucial to the marketing process. And I mean, embarrassingly, I ignored it for a decade and a half. So you probably shouldn't do that.
No, I feel the same. I feel exactly the same way. I look at SparkToro and I think it's I don't know your business well enough to know if it is kind of establishing its own category or if it's simply something new within a larger category. We've kind of struggled with the same questions, with Everyone's Social and employee advocacy, which, is still somewhere between kind of like early adopter and, early end of the market. I forget early adopter, and then there's something between that and early majority. But yeah, for a long time, my view was, I don't really want to talk to people who don't already come to us with a shared vision. I value what you do. I understand what you're trying to do. I want your product. Let's go. Right. And there's always some number of people out there, because none of our ideas are so harebrained that there's not like some number of people that are thinking along the same lines. But, 10 years in for us, some time ago, we really decided to kind of change our approach. And I think it was just born out of the fact that I was talking with a CMO who was a sponsor of our program at this company. This was Workfront. It was acquired by Adobe about a year or so ago, and we were talking about our marketing plan, just kind of a private conversation. And I was saying, we're thinking about this, and he said, it's funny because we use your product. It was, one of the most, we used like 40 different things at Workfront, and Everyone's Social was one of the most impactful that we had employed. But, I think you guys have two issues. Like no one knows about you, and you need someone out there who is, and this was really the main point. He said, you need someone out there who is telling the story, who's telling the vision. And, I think you've done a great job with that over the years. I mean, everything you're putting out is kind of helping to kind of like build that picture, I think, for people about whatever it is you're talking about. But, that's definitely a lesson that I took and kind of we've taken as a marketing group, is like serving existing appetites, right? You're always, we have more control than I think we probably want to acknowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Cameron, I apologize. I'm going to have to run in a couple minutes here.
I got one final question.
Okay.
You got a minute?
All right.
Okay. How important is social to marketers?
I mean, it's almost like asking, it's 1955. How important is television to marketers? In fact, I think it might be like saying in 1955, how important is television, radio, print, and outdoor advertising to marketers? if everyone is spending a tremendous amount of time consuming content in a place, and that is where they go to learn and educate themselves, and that's where they go to connect with their friends, and that's where they go to pay attention to news that they care about and subscribe to interests and engage in commentary. Social is just life. Like there's not that many human beings left who aren't involved in social media for multiple hours a day. And certainly for most businesses, especially in B2B, but even in B2C, if we're talking about middle income and higher countries, socials, that is marketing. I don't know what to tell you, right? It's not
good.
important
No.
to marketing. It is marketing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Social at Scale podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please be sure to subscribe. If you didn't enjoy it, please let me know. You can access past episodes on our site at everyonesocial.com/podcast. As always, please feel free to connect with me directly on Twitter or LinkedIn, and look forward to seeing you next time.